when I saw him the first time. And I said it, I didn't say it to be cute. I said it because I was blown away. I'd never seen a dude that good looking. He was one of the best looking dudes, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm, sure was.
I mean, baby, when I walked in and saw it, there it was.
Here's something the music industry never talks about. Sometimes the most revolutionary sounds come from the most devastating moments. Jerry Reed's guitar style, the one that would eventually make Elvis Presley beg for his help, wasn't born from genius or years of practice. It was born from pure desperation after a childhood accident that should have ended his musical dreams forever. When Jerry was 12 years old, he was working on his family's farm in Georgia when a piece of machinery caught his left hand. The accident mangled 2 of his fingers so badly that doctors told him he'd never play guitar properly again. Most kids would have given up right there, found a different dream, but Jerry Reed wasn't most kids. Instead of accepting defeat, Jerry did something that seemed impossible. He taught himself to play guitar using only his thumb and 2 working fingers. He had to completely reinvent how the instrument worked. Traditional fingerpicking patterns? Impossible. Standard chord formations? Out of the question. Jerry had to create his own system from scratch. What emerged was something the music world had never heard before. Jerry developed this claw hammer technique where he'd use his thumb like a bass player while his damaged fingers created these intricate melody lines that sounded like 2 different guitarists playing at once. It was raw, it was unorthodox, and it was absolutely hypnotic. But here's the part that makes this story incredible. Jerry never told anyone about the accident. For years, professional musicians watched him play and couldn't figure out how he was creating these sounds. They'd try to copy his technique and fail miserably because they were using all their fingers when Jerry was achieving the impossible with just 3. By the time Jerry moved to Nashville in the mid-1960s, his reputation was growing, but he was still considered an oddity. The Nashville establishment didn't know what to do with him. His playing was too strange for country, too complex for rock, too innovative for anyone to categorize. Record labels would listen to his demos and scratch their heads. They knew it was good, but they had no idea how to market it. Jerry's first few singles barely made a dent in the charts. Guitar Man peaked at number 53 and disappeared. Most artists would have been devastated, but Jerry knew something the industry didn't. He wasn't just playing guitar differently, he was playing it in a way that literally nobody else could replicate. See, what Jerry had figured out through years of compensating for his disability was that limitation breeds innovation. While other guitarists were perfecting techniques that thousands of players could copy, Jerry had accidentally created a style that was completely his own. Not because he chose to be different, but because he had no choice but to be different. This is why when Elvis's session musicians spent hours trying to capture the feel of Guitar Man, they kept failing. Harold Bradley, Chip Young, all these legendary players, they were trying to play like Jerry Reed using conventional techniques. It was like trying to paint a Picasso using realistic proportions. The magic wasn't in the notes Jerry was playing. It was in how his damaged hand forced him to play them. But Jerry had no idea that his unique disability was about to become his greatest weapon. When that phone call came from Chet Atkins, saying Elvis needed him at RCA Studios, Jerry thought he was just going in to help out with a quick session. He had no clue that he was walking into a situation where his irreplaceable style would put him face to face with the most powerful machine in the music industry. Think about the irony here. Jerry Reed, a man whose career had been shaped by what he couldn't do with his hands, was about to meet Elvis Presley, a man whose career was being controlled by what he couldn't do with his contracts. One man had been forced to innovate because of physical limitations. The other had been trapped by business limitations that were slowly killing his artistic soul. Neither of them knew it yet, but Jerry's childhood accident had created the only sound that could save Elvis's recording career. And more importantly, it had created the only musician in Nashville who understood that sometimes your weaknesses can become your greatest source of power. When Jerry Reed walked into that RCA studio, still smelling like river water and fish bait, he wasn't just carrying his guitar. He was carrying a lifetime of proving that the impossible was just another word for opportunity. He had no idea he was about to teach that same lesson to the king of rock and roll. The moment those business suits started talking about publishing rights, Jerry Reed's poker instincts kicked in. See, what most people don't know is that Jerry had spent years playing cards in Nashville's back rooms, learning to read tells, understanding when someone was bluffing, and most importantly, knowing when he was holding the winning hand. But this wasn't just about one negotiation. What Jerry was really facing was a machine that had been quietly destroying artists' careers for over a decade. Colonel Tom Parker's publishing scam was legendary in Nashville, but nobody talked about it openly because crossing Elvis meant... Here's how the scam worked. Parker would identify songs that Elvis wanted to record, then his people would approach the songwriter with an ultimatum. Sign away half your publishing or Elvis doesn't cut your song. Period. No negotiation, no compromise, take it or leave it. Most writers took it because they had no choice. Half of something was better than all of nothing, right? But what they didn't realize was that Parker was stealing more than money. He was stealing their future. Because once you gave up that publishing, you lost control over how your song was used, where it was played, and how it was licensed for decades to come. Jerry had heard the whispers. Don Everly from the Everly brothers had been forced to give up publishing. So had dozens of other successful writers. The ones who refused, their songs mysteriously never made it onto Elvis albums, and word would spread that they were difficult to work with. In Nashville's tight-knit community, that reputation could end careers overnight. So when those suits started explaining the deal to Jerry like they were doing him a favor, he immediately understood what was really happening. This wasn't a business negotiation. This was extortion dressed up in legal paperwork. But Jerry had spent enough time at poker tables to know that the person with the most obvious power isn't always the person with the real power. And right then, looking around that studio, Jerry realized something that nobody else had figured out yet. Elvis needed this song more than Jerry needed Elvis. Think about it. Elvis was trapped in a cycle of terrible movies. His recording career was stagnating, and he was desperate to prove he could still make real music. Guitar Man wasn't just another song to him. It was his lifeline back to credibility. And after watching Nashville's best musicians struggle with it all day, everyone in that room knew that Jerry Reed was the only person who could make it work. This is where Jerry's poker background became crucial. In cards, you don't win by having the best hand. You win by making your opponents believe you're willing to walk away from the table, and that's exactly what Jerry did. When they told him about the publishing split, Jerry didn't get angry. He didn't argue. He just got very quiet and very calculating. He looked over at Elvis, still buzzing from the perfect recording session. He looked at the musicians packing up, knowing they'd just captured something magical. He looked at producer Felton Jarvis, probably already hearing dollar signs. Then Jerry did something that shocked everyone in the room. He started explaining the consequences of their demand back to them. Not what it would cost him, but what it would cost them. "So let me understand this," Jerry said, his voice getting colder. "You want me to give up half my song for the privilege of saving your recording session? The session that your 18 musicians couldn't handle. The session that only worked when I walked in here." The room got uncomfortable fast. This wasn't how these conversations usually went. But Jerry was just getting started. "And if I don't sign this paper, you're going to tell Elvis that his comeback single isn't getting released. You're going to explain to the king of rock and roll that his perfect recording means nothing because Jerry Reed wouldn't play ball." This was psychological warfare at its finest. Jerry had flipped the entire power dynamic. Instead of begging for Elvis's approval, he was making them beg for his cooperation. He was forcing them to confront the truth. Without Jerry Reed, they had nothing. The genius of Jerry's bluff was that it wasn't really a bluff. He genuinely was prepared to walk away. Because Jerry understood something that the music industry machine had forgotten: artistic integrity isn't negotiable. You either have it or you don't. When Jerry finally said, "I'm not signing that paper," and headed for the door, he wasn't just refusing a business deal. He was declaring war on a system that had been exploiting artists for years. And for the first time in Colonel Tom Parker's career, that system blinked first. The moment Jerry Reed walked out of that studio, panic set in like nothing Colonel Tom Parker's organization had ever experienced. For the first time in decades, someone had called their bluff and won. And now they had to face the one person they couldn't control, Elvis himself. Within minutes of Jerry leaving, Elvis was asking where his guitar player went. When the business team tried to explain the publishing situation, Elvis cut them off cold. "I don't care about your paperwork. We're releasing that song exactly as we recorded it. Figure it out." It wasn't a request. It was an order from the king of rock and roll to his own empire. Behind closed doors, the scrambling was intense. Parker's people tried everything they could think of. They called Jerry's management, offering sweetened deals. They reached out to other musicians, hoping someone else could replicate Jerry's sound. They even considered shelving the song entirely and pretending the session never happened. But Elvis wasn't backing down. He'd finally found his way back to real music, and nobody was going to take that away from him. For years, he'd been a prisoner of his own success, churning out movie soundtracks and formulaic recordings. Guitar Man represented everything he'd been missing: authenticity, creativity, artistic freedom. He was willing to go to war with his own team to protect it. So Colonel Tom Parker, the man who had built an empire on controlling every detail of Elvis's career, was forced to do something he'd never done before. He backed down. But the real earthquake was just beginning. Word travels fast in Nashville, and within days, every songwriter in town knew what had happened. Jerry Reed had done the impossible. He'd beaten Colonel Tom Parker at his own game and kept his publishing rights. Suddenly, other artists started asking questions. If Jerry Reed could say no, why couldn't they? Writers who had been quietly resentful about giving up their publishing for years began demanding better deals. Session musicians started negotiating harder. The entire power structure that Parker had built on intimidation and exploitation was starting to crack. Parker's organization tried to contain the damage. They spread rumors that Jerry was difficult to work with. They attempted to blacklist him from future Elvis sessions. They even tried to convince other major artists not to work with him. But it was too late. Jerry had proven that artists had power if they were smart enough to recognize it and brave enough to use it. The precedent was set, and there was no going back. Guitar Man became exactly what everyone knew it would be, a massive hit that relaunched Elvis's recording career. But more importantly, it became a symbol. Every time it played on the radio, it reminded the music industry that real artists couldn't be bought, intimidated, or pushed around. Jerry Reed's victory inspired a generation of musicians to stand up for themselves. Within months, publishing deals across Nashville started becoming more equitable. Artists began demanding ownership of their work. The era of unlimited exploitation was coming to an end. But perhaps the most remarkable part of this story is what happened between Jerry and Elvis personally. Instead of resentment, their relationship grew stronger. Elvis respected Jerry not just as a musician, but as a man who wouldn't compromise his principles. They recorded together multiple times after Guitar Man, and Elvis always made sure Jerry was treated with respect. Jerry went on to have an incredible career: hit songs, movie roles, and recognition as one of the most innovative guitar players in history. But people who knew him said he was most proud of that moment when he looked the music industry machine in the eye and said no. Today, Jerry Reed's stand seems even more relevant. In an era where streaming services and tech companies are finding new ways to exploit artists, Jerry's story reminds us that creative people have more power than they realize. Sometimes the biggest risk isn't standing up for what you believe in, it's not standing up. Jerry Reed didn't just steal the spotlight from Elvis Presley that day. He lit a fire that's still burning, showing every artist that their work, their creativity, and their integrity are worth fighting for. But here's the part of Jerry Reed's story that most people never hear: the price he paid for standing up to the most powerful empire in music, and how that price became the foundation for every artist's freedom today. After Guitar Man became a hit, Jerry thought his problems with the music industry were over. He was wrong. Colonel Tom Parker's network was vast and vindictive, and they had long memories. Within months, Jerry started noticing that certain doors in Nashville were quietly closing. Radio programmers who used to take his calls stopped returning them. Record executives who had been courting him suddenly had scheduling conflicts. Session work that should have been flowing his way mysteriously went to other guitarists. The message was clear: you can beat us once, but we'll make sure you pay for it. What Jerry discovered was that Parker's publishing scam was just the tip of the iceberg. The real power lay in an invisible network of favors, threats, and financial arrangements that controlled who got airplay, who got recording contracts, and who got promoted. Cross that network, and you could find yourself frozen out of the industry entirely. For a while, it looked like Parker might get his revenge after all. Jerry's follow-up singles struggled. His album sales dropped. Industry insiders whispered that maybe he'd made a mistake, that maybe half of something really was better than all of nothing. But Jerry had something that Parker's machine couldn't destroy: his relationship with Elvis himself. And Elvis never forgot who had saved his comeback. When Elvis needed guitar work for his next album, he specifically requested Jerry Reed. When other artists heard about Jerry's unique style, Elvis personally recommended him. More importantly, Elvis started using his influence to protect Jerry from the industry backlash. He made it clear to radio programmers and executives that Jerry Reed was under his protection. Cross Jerry, and you'd have to answer to the king of rock and roll himself. This protection allowed Jerry to weather the storm and rebuild his career on his own terms. But the real victory wasn't personal, it was generational. Because Jerry's stand had planted a seed that was growing throughout Nashville. Young songwriters started demanding better contracts. Session musicians began negotiating for ownership of their performances. Artists who had been quietly accepting exploitation for years suddenly found the courage to say no. Jerry Reed had proven that the music industry's power was based on fear, and once that fear was broken, everything changed. By the mid-1970s, the old system was crumbling. Publishing deals became more equitable. Artists started retaining ownership of their work. The era of unlimited exploitation that had defined the music industry for decades was coming to an end. But perhaps the most profound impact was on Elvis himself. Working with Jerry had reminded him what it felt like to collaborate with someone who couldn't be bought or intimidated. For the first time in years, Elvis experienced what it was like to work with a true creative equal. This experience influenced how Elvis approached his later recordings. He started demanding more creative control. He pushed back against formulaic song choices. He began treating musicians as partners rather than employees. In many ways, Jerry Reed's refusal to bow down had liberated not just himself, but the king of rock and roll. Today, when artists retain ownership of their masters, when songwriters negotiate for fair publishing splits, when musicians demand creative control, they're standing on the foundation that Jerry Reed built that day in RCA Studios. Every time an artist says no to a bad deal, they're channeling the spirit of that scruffy fisherman who looked the music industry empire in the eye and refused to blink. Jerry Reed's legacy isn't just his innovative guitar playing or his hit songs. It's the reminder that artistic integrity isn't something you can negotiate away. It's either something you have or something you don't. And once you give it up, you can never really get it back. That's why Jerry Reed didn't just steal the spotlight from Elvis Presley. He used that spotlight to illuminate a path that every artist since has been able to follow. What would you have done in Jerry's position, taken the guaranteed money or risked everything for your principles? The music industry still exploits artists today, but Jerry proved that one person's courage can change an entire system. Drop your thoughts below and hit subscribe for more untold stories that shaped music history.